The most recent civil war in Sudan has gone on for slightly over a year. However, it is not the first of its kind. In fact, according to an article from Al Jazeera in January of 2025, it outlines the fact that Sudan has been a nation that has been marred by civil wars since its very inception. It has been combating and dealing with decades of political infighting and civil wars popping up across the entire nation. This leads me directly to the question that I will attempt to answer today, and that is the war in Sudan drawing to a close? The answer to this is an unfortunate no, for three main reasons. Firstly is the fact that there has been a failure to resolve the key issues for why the war began in the first place. Secondly is the constant failure of negotiation efforts, highlighting the absolute impossibility. And lastly, being the genocide committed against both groups, breeding hatred and distrust. Firstly, the nations have been long at civil war because of the fact that they have been unable to resolve their large political differences. In fact, according to the International Council on Foreign Relations in January of 2025, the exact same reason that the Sudanese civil war is being fought right now in the year of 2025 is for the same reason it was being fought in 1955 with the first Sudanese civil war. It is because of a struggle between a democratic citizenship and an authoritarian paramilitary group that rules over the country with an iron fist. These two groups are always going to be and have constantly been opposed to each other. In fact, they are both such large groups in the sense that the democratically backed populace has a large portion of the population on their side, but the paramilitary groups have a large amount of force that the democratic groups simply do not have access to. For this reason, the war in Sudan won't be coming to a close unless the two sides are able to reach some sort of compromise. Because through the means of war, while the democratic-backed citizenship has a large portion of the population and the authoritarian paramilitary groups have a lot of the power, there simply isn't any end in sight through conflict, so compromise must be the only solution. However, compromise is also an impossibility, as we will see just by simply examining the two ideologies that the nations hold, the democratic beliefs of the citizenship as well as the authoritarian beliefs of the paramilitary groups simply mark an impossibility for compromise. Because as we can see, as according to the Washington Institute in an article from August of 2024, we see that the vast majority of the population of Sudan are simply unwilling to make any sort of compromise in their democratic ideals, where they so strongly desire democracy and the paramilitary groups so desperately need authoritarianism to hold on to their power. There's no room for compromise. And if it can't end through conflict and it can't end through compromise, there's no reason to assume it's going to magically come to a close now, especially when it hasn't for over 70 years. Secondly, another major reason for why the war in Sudan will not be coming to a close is due to the fact that many nations have attempted to negotiate peace, yet many have failed. In fact, the United States themselves failed negotiating peace. As according to the United States Institute of Peace, in December of 2024, the nation of the United States pulled out of attempting any peace negotiations between the two warring groups in September of that year. After a little over a year of conflict in Sudan, even the United States, the most powerful nation in the world, decided that peace was simply something they couldn't obtain. While other nations have tried to pick up the mantle, namely Qatar, attempting to be a mediator between the two groups, they're going to face the exact same issues that the United States faced. Namely, that neither side actually wants an end to the conflict. We can see this as according to an Al Jazeera article in August of 2024, before the United States pulled out, we see that the nations in the two warring parts of Sudan, simply every time that a peace deal was near, they would pull out. They weren't willing to commit to peace because they are idealistic. They want their form of government above all, regardless of the consequence. They simply don't want peace. They want their form of government. There is no ability for them to compromise, and there's an absolute unwillingness to. But this unwillingness to compromise isn't simply born from ideological differences. It also comes from a breeding of hatred and distrust, which brings me directly into my third point, and that is about the allegations of genocide that are being faced by both sides in the conflict. Now, according to the United States government themselves, in an article from January of 2025, they have just finished, only a week ago, an investigation into both sides in the Sudanese civil war and found that both sides were guilty of committing acts of genocide and ethnic cleansing. What this means is that both sides of the conflict have attempted terrible crimes against humanity, have attempted the absolute destruction of the other group in Sudan. This breeds an absolute hatred and distrust of the other group. For if they are willing to attempt the absolute destruction, the worst crime against another group that can be committed against the other one, then they view the existence of that group as a mere threat to their security. For this reason, hatred and distrust is bred, and there is a desire within to bring about the absolute and complete destruction of the other group. With this desire to bring about their absolute destruction in order to achieve their own security, playing off of the other fears and their desire to maintain power, as the authoritarian paramilitary groups have, or to obtain power like the democratic citizens want, there's simply not just an unwillingness to compromise, but an absolute hatred that is present on both sides of this conflict. And where this hatred is present, this deeply seated distrust, there isn't a willingness for cooperation, and there isn't a desire for peace. Without a desire for peace, without wanting to build a new Sudan together, then simply peace won't come. To conclude, peace is an absolute impossibility and will not be coming to the nation of Sudan in recent times for three main reasons. Firstly, is because of the failures to resolve or compromise the major reasons why the war began in the first place. A conflict between authoritarianism and democracy which has not been resolved. Secondly, another major reason that is being highlighted is by the absolute impossibility of the peace deals, being highlighted by the fact that even the United States themselves accepted the impossibility and futility of this, pulling themselves out of peace negotiations. And lastly, being the fact that both sides are guilty of genocide against one another, breeding hatred and distrust between the two groups. Thank you.